Okay, we are recording. Max, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
I'm all right. I'm all right. Heavy days traveling.
Yeah, just came off a nice 20 hour total from south of Brazil to San Francisco. So it's all good.
How?
I remember that being easier than it feels today.
All right. Well, look. I'll go straight into the playlist, mate, and I'm going to ask you, please, for track one, to tell me the song that you regard as having the greatest ever intro, please.
Yeah, well, I debated putting "Take on Me" in there. I thought that would be an asshole move to do, but
Why
um,
not? Why not?
no, it was just it's like at a time where the vocal comes in, like 10, 15 seconds after the intro. I just think that instrumental intros are hugely undervalued these days, and I guess "Take 'Em" is one of those examples that seems to catch people's attention, even though it takes, I don't know, half a minute for for the vocal to come in or more. No, I mean, I debated it with myself for a long time because you kind of want to sound more clever than you are, and show that you are aware of all the music that's out there. But I thought about like, why does it have to be? We call pop songs songs, and then classical music pieces. But I thought, what is the kind of opening lines that have affected me the most? And I kind of rummaged through my own sort of favorite playlists over the years, and then I thought, nah, I'm going to go with the Serenade for Strings by Tchaikovsky. I don't know if you're going to play it on this podcast or not. If that's
We put together a Spotify playlist to accompany it, so
right,
people can
cool.
go
Well,
and
make
listen
sure you
to
get the
them.
right
I
version, because
did.
it's just
I got the
really
Norwegian one.
it's a really yeah, that sounds a bit patriotic, but it is particularly, and the director is English, by the way,
Okay.
so it's all good. um it's just those string lines at the outset there has this, for me, this perfect blend of urgency and tenderness. It's just emotionally moving, but also very stirring and forceful and majestic. And I like to think on some of our best work that's what we've been trying to achieve, or maybe have achieved. And so, and I actually used that intro for when we came back after having disbanded in early 90s, and came back in around the year 2000. That was the intro before the show. That was the kind of where the show started with this piece. It just has this amazing melodic and powerful intro. So that's why I went. I'm not an expert classical listener, but I do have friends who are, and I'm constantly exposing myself to all kinds of music. So that's the one I went for.
Wonderful.
I'm not trying to be too highbrow. It's just
No, no, not at all. Not at
I
all.
just feel like every choice. I was considering "Fire" by Arthur Brown, because I am the god of hellfire.
That's a great intro.
Yeah, I know. I mean, there are so many good intros. I mean, intros are hugely important. That's the first hook in the fish, isn't it? That's like the thing that draws you in. Um, so yeah, I mean, intros is everything.
Well, with that in mind, you touched on something with Take On Me a moment ago, saying about how long it took to get to the vocal. And you were crafting perfect pop records, and I just watch how my children consume their music now, and they've got very very quick thumbs, and they're
Yeah.
whizzing through music on TikTok, and I speak to new bands like a lot, and they're talking about the importance of like having this hook right at the beginning so they can get on a Spotify playlist, because there's all of these sort of things that seem to be factor into getting your music out there now. And so, Max, I want to ask you, like, does any of that kind of like trends in how people are consuming music ever filter through into the creative process of both your work and the work of Aha?
Well, I mean, it certainly we tried our best to make, like, as you say, really perfect pop records back in the day. But I guess we're more part of the resistance now than anything else. And I think
Yeah.
we're kind of like more the slow food of the music industry than like the fast and effective. Yeah, I mean, if it has affected us, it's actually more to disregard this urge to. I mean, not that you don't want people, you want people to get into the atmosphere immediately, but you don't want to sort of, there's this infernal editing of everything to try to maximize efficiency that can lose a lot of things too. And I love artists who take their time, and a lot of the great music that's being made isn't like that, and it means that it exists outside of the charts, and that's fine, and we do too these days. So I think it's just a sign of the times, this sort of restlessness. It's the way we watch news. I mean, we just, I don't like that news, give me other news. It's a bit like the Groucho Marx quote, these are not good news, give me other news. Yeah, if anything, I think we allow ourselves to live a little outside the realm of optimizing for the TikTok generation. And strangely, like I was just being told that Take On Me has like something like 900 million views on some crazy dance contests on TikTok. I'm not even on TikTok, and my kids are too old to be on TikTok. So, or at least, well, they would probably shame me for saying that. They aren't. But you know what I mean? It's crazy to see young generations, and you see it now with Kate Bush surfacing with the Running Up That Hill. How great is that? I mean, there is a need for all kinds of music out there, not just the hyper efficient, hyper designed hit records. So I'm just happy to be able to be given the privilege by loyal fans over decades to continue to do what we love and do it in the way we see fit.
Wonderful. I'm going to take you back for track 2 and ask you to tell me, please, the first song you remember hearing that had an emotional impact on you, please.
Well, it's really, really, you have to kind of choose there, because, as a young child, you would hear music that my father was a musician, my grandfather was a musician, so I grew up with instruments around the house. I grew up with people playing and performing. So I can't hand on heart say that. I think I was affected hugely by music very early on, without really remembering tracks that stood out. But I do remember the first artist that changed the trajectory of my musical taste and career. And that was when I discovered the Doors by accident. I think, because Paul and I had already started gravitating towards each other at the age of 12 and 13. And we started competing by competing to buy records that was interesting. And we kind of discovered the 60s as our holy grail of music. And that was very different from what our contemporaries were playing at the time. So I think that's where I came of age, rediscovering the 60s as a young wannabe aspiring musician. And I think it was around the age of 13, I was sent to England for a summer with a family there, and went into record stores and basically probably bought anything that was from the 60s without knowing much about it. Discovered, Jimi Hendrix, Janis Joplin, the Beatles, obviously, as before then, were a huge influence. But hearing the Doors for the first time was a bit of an electric shock. So that's the track I chose. I bought the album Waiting for the Sun, and tried to convince Paul that this was a really cool band. And it was a bit like Not Invented Here syndrome. It was like, I didn't find it, so I better not say it's too good straight off the bat. And it was just by accident that I fell onto it. And I remember the song "Summer's Almost Gone" had this beautiful melancholic vibe that just blew my mind. And then we were both huge Doors fans, to the point where we named our first real band the Bridges. You know, very ambitious young kids saying like, the doors are now closed. We need to build bridges.
Yeah.
It's a very, very self-important statement, but it did shape us incredibly, and ever since it's been one of those go-to artistic oeuvres that you never sort of tire of.
Because that's incredibly intense, and as much as there's lots of pop sensibilities to the Doors, you know, it's very intense and heavy music for a 13-year-old. What would you say if you had to pinpoint the emotion that you got from hearing that? What would that emotion have been?
I may have been 14. I mean, I may have been really grown up. I may have got my timelines wrong. I think Hendrix was probably 13. But what was the question? What did I get?
What's the emotion, if you had to pinpoint the exact emotion?
Just a sense of hope in all the dread, you know, and this boldness in the performance, and sort of non-compromising atmosphere. That it's quite hard to pinpoint, but I guess, you know, at the core of all of Baha's music, and I guess all of Norwegian art and culture, there's a strong sense of melancholia, and I think we look at melancholia as we tend to think of it as yearning. We tend to think of it as a Norwegian psychologist friend of mine calls it white sorrow. It's the sort of the missing of the things you never got. You know, this yearning for, and as opposed to black sorrow, which is losing something you love. And that kind of describes it in a way. You know, this yearning is what we get fired up by melancholia. I mean, I get sad when I hear happy-go-lucky music, and I get emotionally stirred and focused and inspired when I hear music with melancholic content. It's a Scandinavian thing. What can I say? I mean, you know, I don't expect everybody to understand.
If you're having a day where you wake up and you're not feeling great, you're feeling blue, you're feeling, you know, a little low, do you reach for something up, or are you happy to kind of listen to something melancholy and process that feeling and kind of almost give it a hug for a bit?
The last alternative, you know. If I'm blue, I reach for blues. I mean, does that answer the question?
Yeah, absolutely. I've never met a musician that said otherwise.
Oh yeah, well, yeah. You know, sorry not to be unique there, but I mean, you know, I do like a bit of light in the tunnel. I mean, I'm the guy who wrote the riff on "Take on Me," for God's sake. I'm not like you don't like to hang your head down. But you don't want to. I think the worst is just to pretend that things are hunky-dory when they're not. The best is music is therapeutic in that sense. I think not only for artists but for the audience, for the listener. And I think sad music is not meant to make you feel sad. It's meant to make you feel connected to other people in the world.
Absolutely. I'm going to stay in the formative years for track 3, and I'm going to ask you please to tell me the song that reminds you of your time at school.
Again, a lot of things to choose from, but Beatles was part of the sort of staple diet growing up, and everything by the Beatles. You know, there was nothing we didn't love. But I remember being particularly fond of the Let It Be album initially, and I think I chose I've Got a Feeling um, because there was something uplifting about that song, something kind of irreverent and cool that sort of reminded me of my school years. This sort of you know kid who didn't know what life was bringing. Felt pretty invincible at the time. Um, had dark moments. Had like the Beatles were never a shallow group. I remember, in Norway, the thing was that when you heard a record, I think the first, well, I think it was 4 or 5 years old, was when I heard "She Loves You" the first time, and I kind of Norwegianified the title. I didn't know what English was at the time, so I just phonetically make it Norwegian to "Slafs you," yeah, which means Schlaps is a bit when you're a messy eater. So you kind of make up your own world. And but I think for me, I've Got a Feeling had that sort of that hopefulness, that sort of forward-leaning kind of kid meeting the day, happy to see friends and just kind of getting on with life.
Yeah. How was school? Was that an enjoyable experience?
Yeah, I think I wasn't I wasn't bullied as a kid. I mean Morton was quite severely, and if you know Morton, you can understand the kids that couldn't latch onto his esoteric worldview. But he had a very kind of rough school experience growing up. I didn't. I mean, I grew up in a place where there was an enormous amount of kids in all ages, and so you had a huge, the big classes, kids from different backgrounds, and it was just I had a really good time at school. Actually, I can't remember it being traumatic. I was bored a lot. I felt I was restless. I was always talking too much and getting thrown out of class for making too much noise. But I was super happy. I uh, can't say I was traumatized by the Norwegian school system, except for the boredom, which is mind-numbing at times.
You said that you and Paul were making music, when back when you were 13, 14. Was was there ever any sort of question as to what you wanted to do with your life? Was music always going to be what you wanted to do?
I kind of decided quite early on. I mean, to this day, I'm working with the same things that were my hobbies or I never like to call them hobbies, but what I was interested in as a young person. I make music. I make visual art because I also work parallel as a visual artist, and both of them have become professions um, that I work with, for more than 40 years now. And I write poetry, and those I still do those things, and I've been lucky to have enough success to be able to keep doing it without doing anything else. And I think my father was a musician, my grandfather was a musician, as I mentioned, so it was easy for me to make the leap into believing that could be a life for me too. And my mother was very supportive. She said, "I don't care if you sweep the streets, as long as you're happy doing it, do what you want." And she was a teacher, so she came from academic side. But I think I just had a sort of a clear path to defining for myself what life would be. And I remember telling Paul very early, like at the age of 13 or whatever, that he asked me, what do you think you're gonna do when you grow up? And I was like, I'm gonna be a musician. And it didn't feel like a big statement. It just felt like it was possible for me to say that.
Yeah.
So that has to do with my growing up. And my father's fatal accident when I was 6, I guess was formative also in the sense that music had a special significance as a therapeutic area. So that may have played into it also.
Having a father and a grandfather that was in music and being so sure, and saying to Paul that you wanted to be a musician at a young age, was you a confident young man?
Yeah, I think I was a cocky young man, but at the same time, kind of easily hurt. I was probably giving better than I received, in the sense that I kind of pivoted between being cocky and being kind of emotionally devastated. It's an interesting time, isn't it? I see a lot of the same in young people that surround me today. That I love that attitude of like invincibility that like Oscar Wilde said, youth is wasted on the young. And I think it's a lovely quote, but I think it was absolutely wrong. I've come to the conclusion that youth absolutely belongs to the young, and the more you can retain of it, I guess is the better.
Yeah, that 20-hour travel would have been nothing when you was 15, mate.
I would have loved it. I would have been all over it like a rash. I mean, but you get a more you get a sense of you get better at realizing, your temporal or your sort of transient situation as you get older. You start to choose away things that feels like a waste of time, and spend it on the meaningful things. And I guess that's the beauty of getting older.
Absolutely. Tell me about the first record you bought from a record shop, please.
That was, as far as I can remember, and truth be told, because I did receive records, I did wish for other records before that, as a child, like for Christmas and stuff. But the first one I bought myself was the Jimi Hendrix compilation album, and that was in the UK. That's definitely when I was 13. Because the next year I went on Interrail with Paul, and that's when we started buying like wholesale 60s records in every city we went to. It was a purple cover. I don't have it anymore, sadly, but it was a compilation of great Jimi Hendrix tracks, and I guess the song that really blew that wide open for me was Little Wing.
Yeah.
I think it was actually the live version. I can't quite remember. But we were huge Jimi Hendrix fans. I mean, that was also one of the formative artists, when discovering music seriously and going against the grain. I mean, nothing wrong with ABBA, but people were listening to ABBA and disco and kind of in a whole different area. And there was a lot of, heavy metal, like Deep Purple, Nazareth, Uriah Heep. There was the youth culture around the time was centered around different music than we ended up listening to. And Jimi Hendrix was the first kind of lucky buy. I think I bought it because of the cover. I thought it looked amazingly cool.
Yeah.
And that also changed our whole fashion sense. We started prowling the sort of street markets for hippie clothes, which were kind of out of fashion at the time. So became hippies at the age of 13, 14.
Wonderful. Tell me a little bit about your relationship with the record store as you got older.
Well, it used to be a place we went during our school days. It used to be we couldn't afford to buy records, but you were allowed to go in and put on a pair of headsets and listen to records. And we would just spend hours after school going into the record store and listen to records. And that was like a fountain of joy, and like a surreptitious jar in a way. But yeah, as I get older, I mean, when we moved to England, there was this shocking, that was at the age of, I don't know what, 18, 19. And that we went to England to be musicians and become pop stars. And it was just Paul and me on the first trip. And we were shocked by, first of all, UK radio, like how much music was just coming at you. New music, like, because in Norway at the time you had very few radio channels, and pop music was played growing up 1 hour a day in the afternoon. And it was just a kind of like completely different scenario. But we did, we went into all the record stores and we're kind of just shocked to realize, hold on a minute, there's really good new music that's coming out. And so that was a rude awakening, like, and that sort of jetted us straight into the 80s and was sort of formative in terms of what sound we ended up with. I mean, that plus the fact that we didn't have work permits and we didn't have a band of people, it was just, two, and then eventually with Morten joining, three of us. So we had to kind of learn how to use synthesizers, and we had to learn how to create our own demos and our own tracks. So we became sort of multi-instrumentalists. And back in the day, I started as a guitarist and vocalist in the band. Paul played the drums. Then he would swap to guitars, and we had two guitars for a while. I swapped to keyboards. So we were already just using instruments to write more than to perform. We weren't ever going to be like virtuoso musicians. That was never the plan and never the ambition. But I think record stores as a young adult was, as a child, it was a sanctuary, a way of this sort of escaping into a different world. And as a young adult, it was a kind of a game changer in terms of being exposed to, in the UK, being exposed to new music, and both were quite formative experiences.
I'm going to take you clubbing for track 5 and ask you to tell me a song that soundtracked those years, please.
Well, clubbing was not a huge part has never been a huge part of my life, but we did when we moved to London as a young band together.
What year was that, Max? Do you mind me asking? What year did you come over?
Well, the first time we went was 1981. Just 1981, 82 into 82, and there was no clubbing going on. It was just Paul and me in a bed sit, trying to find musicians in England that were interested in playing with two scruffy-looking Norwegians who had an acoustic guitar and a huge synth with a small speaker. But when we went back to Norway and formed the Ha with Morten, we made some demos there, and then we went back to the UK in 1983. I think it was 82. Well, you're going to have to ask Morten. He keeps track of those things. But so yeah, around that time, we were home for about 6 months. So it would have been 82, 83. And we decided the only way we could sort of promote ourselves, because Morten was a bit of a flamboyant character, and he sort of embraced that whole new romantic movement, and kind of used house paint in his hair, and like cut up the jeans to be full of holes, and ours were falling apart anyway, so we kind of looked apart. But we used to go out to the Camden Palace, and because Morton was a bit of a show off, we would, you know, eventually just kind of be able to get in for free. So there was a lot of that, you know, the sort of London club scene. There was an intense little period there where we went out clubbing, stealing everyone else's drinks when they weren't looking. And the track I chose, incidentally, also the sort of the track in my wife and my relationship, is Ashes to Ashes by David Bowie, because that was a track that was danceable but meaningful as a song. And I think that was the one that stands out for me as the highlight of my short and very clumsy clubbing career.
I'm really fascinated by that period of UK music. I run a venue in Essex that used to be called Crocs, and that was where Depeche Mode started. I live very near where they formed, and Vince Clarke and such. So that whole kind of synth scene and what was going on in London at Club for Heroes and Blitz and the Camden Palais, the fact that you was floating about in that, like, I'm fascinated by it. Did that feel like an exciting time?
Yeah, I mean, it was super exciting. We were poor as dirt when we were there, but we somehow managed to finagle our way in. And I remember also, like, because all the ones you're mentioning is prior to the Hippodrome, because that was like the huge thing when it came a little later, but around the same time. But it was a very it was actually, you know, you went to clubs also, I guess, to be exposed to music that you hadn't heard. You know, you didn't go into to sort of hop along to music you knew, at least we didn't. So it was and there was this sort of flamboyancy, like everyone was kind of, you know, painted up and tarted up, and there was a lot of experimentation going on in the fashion scene. I was never really good at that. I mean, neither was Paul, to be honest. Morton was the one who's trying to whip us into shape before going out on a Friday night. But it was I mean, looking back at it, it was a lot of interesting stuff going on, and particularly as you were mentioning, you know, like things that Depeche Mode did, and later Vince Clarke with the Yazoo. Those were all kind of records that we would just absorb and make part of our own sound, you know, in defining that. So so it was definitely a super exciting time to be in London.
Yeah. Well, I've just told you about Depeche Mode and Yazoo and Vince Clarke and people from my home county. So I'm going to ask you for the next track, please, to tell me a favourite song from an artist from yours, please.
Yeah, there's been a lot of good music coming out of Norway in the last 10, 20 years. When we left in the early 80s, we didn't rate any of the Norwegian, and there was this inferiority complex as well. We were kind of laughed out of town for having the ambition to go abroad and say we're going to make it, you know, we're going to make it. And so we actually we made the rational decision that if we try to get a record deal in Norway, we will never ever be listened to outside of Norway. So we're going to go straight to the Holy Grail, go to London, and make it there. That was the simple equation that you know, it didn't. I mean, it did happen, but it wasn't like London was waiting for us.
Yeah.
There has been consistently good stuff coming out, and more so. And I think Scandinavia as an area of interest has only grown over the years. And there are regional differences. I mean, the Swedes have been much better at making kind of big hit records, where the Norwegians were kind of a little more introvert, a little more nerdy, and perhaps also more interesting because of that. But I chose a track that I thought was outstanding. This is later in life. This is like post Aha, or later in our career. I discovered an artist called Magnet. He's from Bergen in Norway, but he was living in England and had quite a following there actually. So I think the first time I heard this song was in the UK, and I had no idea that it was a Norwegian artist. But it's a beautiful track, and it's called "Nothing Hurts Now" by Magnet.
Beautiful record that is. Do you know what? I was listening to some of it when I got sent your list today, and thinking about it now, I didn't pick up on it earlier, but I think the first time I heard Magnet, am I right in saying, did he work with Gemma Hayes on a cover of Dylan's "Lay Lady Lay"?
That's correct. I think that was his big hit.
Yeah,
I was a huge Dylan fan, so I wasn't too enamored by it to begin with. But it's a really good cover.
that's beautiful.
But I think for me, there was like the album that I believe the album that Nothing Hurts Now is on is called Quiet and Still. And he's produced some amazing music over the years, and I think he kind of just left the business, or at least left the UK and went back to Norway to live a simpler life. But he's made some really nice, really touching stuff. And for me, Nothing Hurts Now was one of those tracks, right up there in my mind with songs by Soft Cell, like Say Hello, Wave Goodbye, and things that we really loved and really kind of embraced when we were just starting out in the UK.
Yeah, it's the last track, Mags, and you get to play Tastemaker, or as the kids call it, Influencer now.
Oh, wow.
And I'm going to ask you, please, to tell me a track that you think many may not know that you would like them to hear, please.
Yeah, I wish I could have picked up. I mean, there's a lot of tracks by people like Bon Iver, and however contemporary I try to sound, I guess I always sound a bit old dude. But I don't mind that. I think there's just a lot of music that has to be rediscovered and valued by younger generations, and if anything I can say makes them do that, then that's good enough. And one of those records that I just rediscovered actually quite late in life, compared to when it was put out, was one of these artists was Nick Drake. And I think Riverman by Nick Drake is just a must for every generation. Just it has the best string arrangement in the world ever made. Perhaps challenged by some of Beck's stuff on Sea Change. I have to get.
Oh, great shout! Yeah, absolutely. But I do think like there should be this kind of rule that when you sort of get to like sort of 14, 15, somebody should just give you a Nick Drake record and go, look, have that. Everything's going to be all right. Trust me. And get lost in that record, because it's magical, right?
It's amazing. And yeah, I mean, sort of poetically significant that the guy who made those records died of an overdose of antidepressants. I mean, it's just the saddest, most beautiful music in the world. Yeah, I agree with you, and I made that. I made that sort of parental decision with my kids. Like, you got to listen to this. You got to listen to this. You got to listen to this. And I mean, they found their own way and their own artists. But my kids are pretty well versed in the music that I think everybody should listen to. They've been force fed a lot of stuff, including Nick Drake, over the years.
Wonderful. Well, Max, we put together, as mentioned, a Spotify playlist of all the songs that you've chosen, as well as some of your work as well, of course, and so people can go and explore everything we've spoken about today. as we're out of the pandemic now, normal surfaces resumed, gigs are happening, festivals are happening, records are being made. What's happening, Mags, for the rest of 2022? What are you looking forward to?
Um, well, we have had a pretty busy 22 because tours from 20 and new shows were crammed together in a kind of a chaotic blend of arena shows, some stadiums, and some club club gigs and festivals. So we're just at the tail end of it now. It's actually just two more shows. The last one is on Sunday at the Hollywood Bowl with the Los Angeles Philharmonic Orchestra, and that's the end of the road for us for who knows how long. There's no future plans. We just sort of cleaned the slate after that. But there is a new record coming out. We made during the pandemic. We made a kind of a music-based film version, like a sort of a poetic letter from the high north. Recorded it in a town way up north in Norway called Bodø, which is above the polar circle. And it's coming out. The film's coming out in September, and as a consequence of that, the soundtrack is also a new album. It's new material. So both film and album is called True North. So I guess yeah, I think it's going to be in like cinemas for like I don't know, a one day or weekend event around like 500 cinemas around the world in September. So I'm guessing I'll be able to go to one of them, not all 500 in a day, since they're all happening on the same day. And then I guess promoting the record in whatever way we can at this point.
Yeah. Wonderful. Well, Max, I'm so thrilled that you gave up some time today. I know you've been travelling, and I know you're in the middle of touring. So thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure to talk records with you today. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Always interested in talking record.
Thank you. Cheers, Max.
Thank you very much.